Welcome to the Galileo Ventures podcast with myself, James, and my co-host, Hugh, and
Hello.
our new and latest co-host. Can you have three co-hosts? I'm not sure.
I don't know if you should have three co-hosts.
Julia! Give us a wave, Jules.
Hello.
We are three VCs serving up insider insights and hot takes. Welcome to our first live episode of 2025. I can't believe it's been March and we just recording our first live episode. But here we are. Let's dive in. We're going to cover a few topics today. First and foremost, we're going to cover some Galileo news and toot our own horn. That's going to be fun. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the latest X viral trend, vibe coding. I shouldn't really attribute it to X, but it is definitely on the word of the mouth of everyone here in San Francisco, where I'm recording from. And we're going to talk a bit about voice agents. Let's dive in. Before we do, though, I'm going to give a quick shout out to our podcast sponsor for season 2. We are sponsored by Herbert Smith Freehills, one of the leading law firms. HSF regularly represents top founders and investors with deep expertise across the entire startup lifecycle. So if you're interested to learn more, please head to galileo.lol/HSF. Okay, on to the first topic. We are expanding to SF. In fact, according to Capital Brief, we are the first, round of applause, we are the first early stage venture capital firm to announce an office in San Francisco to, quote, better support our founders, expand to US market. I think I just quoted myself on an article that quoted me, so that's weird.
How meta.
How meta. We are one of the first early stage funds to do this, and of course, as part of that announcement, we have added Julia French. Welcome to the team, Julia.
Thank you.
I wanted to introduce you to our podcast audience because you've actually been on an episode last year, and I thought it might be good to bring you back on now that you've officially joined the team. Tell us a bit about yourself, Jules. Who are you and what have you done in the startup space?
Oh, wow. That's a lot. That's a lengthy intro. I guess, let's see. I've been in tech since I was about 22. Started when I was in college. I was the person who was running around my college campus going, we're going to be able to use 802.11 and you can take your laptop outside and you don't have to write papers in the library anymore. To which my business professor said, I don't think that will really happen, which I like to remind him of when I see him when I go back for alumni days. Anyway, let's see. Things I've done. I went to SF in 2004, went down with the two ladies that I interned for, and then kind of found my way to my first startup, which happened to be one of Atlassian's competitors. And then kind of from there started working on the concept of Office 2.0, so SaaS-enabled products, and then found my way kind of in, I always kind of end up going back to advertising networks and social networks because I feel like they tend to be the kind of like first mover of how a consumer is going to interact with technology. And along the way, there was Atlassian. I built out their developer relations program, working primarily with the San Francisco team. Met a lot of Australians through Mike and Scott, and then kind of moved to working independently with a bunch of different startups that I thought were really great. So those would be the likes of Dropbox, Weathersphere, which was a smaller app that was number one in the App Store for years. WhatsApp, which everybody knows, those are kind of like your big highlight ones. There were many along the way that were also highlights, a lot of acquisitions.
And to be clear, you were early days of WhatsApp, right? How many people were there in the room when you were part of the team there?
We were less than 25, and it was probably, I think to this day, the best team I ever worked on. I can't explain.
Until Galileo.
I think team and culture, I think the biggest thing you learn after doing this for so long is that the team is 90% of everything. Like just the team and how the team is structured. I think that there has to be a purity to what you're trying to do. And everybody has to have an emotional driver for that. And the politics are not, you can't have a team that has politics or ego, or you just really have to be mission driven.
Yeah, and we did a fun little interview with you on our blog mentioned there, so if you haven't seen it, go have a look. But I thought I'd just do that one thing. If you can share one bit of advice to the founders that are listening right now before we dive into some of the other stuff, what would you share off the top of your head? Given all your experience.
Sure. I think the one thing would be make sure that you are mission driven, especially as we're going through this very large transformation that's about to occur. Don't build for the sake of building. Build for a mission driven purpose.
Okay. That's interesting because we're going to talk about the building for the sake of building in a second later on. The other question I've had before we move on to the next topic is, why are we expanding to San Francisco? I thought rather than me answer that, I'm going to throw it to you two. Why is Galileo expanding to San Francisco?
Jules, why don't you let us know?
No, you're up here. I think all three of us kind of recognized last year when we were talking about how significant San Francisco will be in this next phase. And then the other thing that we realized is that it's becoming really challenging for founders that have to come back, particularly Australian founders having to come back to Australia to raise their money, then go back to San Francisco. That there's not a really strong setup in terms of Australian support. There's been attempts and there's different groups, but in terms of being able to really get stuck into the ecosystem in San Francisco, it's been challenging. There's cultural differences that are pretty strong that have to be navigated. And I think what we saw is that there is a huge opportunity to support the Australian founders that are in San Francisco, but also given the fact our portfolio base has so many companies that are not just here in Sydney, that we need to be able to provide them support in San Francisco as well. Okay, your turn here.
I have maybe a simpler answer. I think that the simple answer I give is, certainly from our point of view as VCs, a lot of the early successes in our portfolio have been the companies that we've been able to connect adequately across into the US ecosystem, both through SF and otherwise, whether that was for follow-on investors or customers or both. That's where we've seen a lot of success out of the first portfolio. And of course, I would say a lot of Australian, startups obviously take that same path. And, it made really good sense for us to have, a greater degree of presence there, given we have multiple portfolio companies with follow-on investors out of the States. And also that, they're probably some of the leading ones in terms of, again, I think people often forget the business of VC side. Part of our job is to make sure that we can, connect our startups with big pockets of funding for the next, to be able to carry them on through the future. And obviously the US has a much greater depth of funding and options available for founders than we do typically see here in Australia, even though, yes, the Australian market is better than it used to be.
Yeah. I would add one thing, which is the most incredible thing around sort of AI funding. In fact, I was at a breakfast this morning with Andres and Deal, the hot, employment company, and just the amount of funding, if you look at the global funding, amount of concentration of VC funding in this 10-mile radius of where I'm sitting right now is just through the roof. And it's almost post-COVID, people thought that would be more distributed. AI has changed it again, and it's become more concentrated. It's not to say there isn't funding. Australia's growing really well. We know we hit $4 billion last year. I predict we're going to hit about $5 billion this year, just a bit under. But it is pretty amazing and astounding. So I think that capital pools are so deep here. It just makes a lot of sense that at some point in your journey, you're going to have to come through here, right? Enough about us, as they say. Let's move on to the topical news item of the day, which is something that's happened in the last few months with the advent of extremely advanced LLMs that turn out to be pretty good at writing code. One of my favorite quotes on this, or tweets, I should say, is by the very man who coined the term vibe coding, which is Andre Karpathy. The hottest new programming language is English, quote unquote. And in particular, he calls vibe coding, I'm just going to quote him here because it's probably the best one, which is a new kind of coding I call vibe coding, where you fully give into the vibes, embrace exponentials, and forget that the code even exists. It's possible because the LLMs are getting too good. And then I sort of jump to the end of his quote, which is, I'm building a new project or web app, but it's not really coding. I just see stuff, say stuff, run stuff. He talks to his computer. Sorry, man. and copy paste, and it mostly works. Now, the first thing I want to ask is, have you all vibe coded, and what have you vibe coded? Hugh, you can go first.
Look, I have strong views on this. It will surprise nobody. I think there's less. It's a bit like, to me, a bit of it is a chasm between the promise and the commentary, I guess, about AI-driven coding and reality, right? Because there's AI-supported software development, which has been around for a decent while now, right? And that's things like code completions, all of the IDE helpers, all that sort of stuff. Really helpful, right? Most of GitHub Copilot is that kind of world of stuff. And then there's and then vibe coding is kind of, I guess, the next step, right? The vibe coding is the theory of, I don't really have to have any idea what I'm doing. I just, type in the box, make me a e-commerce website, and it does everything, right?
Yeah.
And I think that there's a piece here of where, yes, early on, obviously, the expansion of, what it can do has gotten bigger and bigger. But the hard part, I think, is most software engineers in the world aren't working on new code bases. And we look at that quote recently from YC talking about how in the latest batch, 90% of the code from the teams in the batch was quote unquote written by AI. Like when code bases are really small, it's both context window problems as well as RAG and retrieval and indexing and things like that. But like when code bases are really small, these tools work really great, right? And when you're using essentially, 2,000 line long, that's the entire code base, sure, right? These things are really easy and they work really well. But the reality is most engineers are working on big, complicated things with lots of different bits and pieces and legacy shit hanging around and everything else. And these tools all fall apart. The frequency with which it's a bit like talking to a friend, John. Hello, shout out to John, who was saying that yes, it is very much like a junior engineer, right? And we have I use Devon, which is one of those sort of bougie things that's meant to replace the enterprise software developer, the agentic solutions. And look,
Does it work?
It is like a junior. It is like a junior engineer, right?
Yeah.
Inclusive of things like if you say to it, replace all these, replace all these hex codes with these variables, it does a great job. When you say to it to do anything more complicated, it gets stuck in a hole.
Yeah. Well, but counterpoint.
And like a junior engineer, you come back to it after an hour and you just see it going in circles, right? And you're like, why haven't you stopped and talked to me?
Counterpoint though, don't you think that like the interesting part of this is not so much will it replace advanced engineering? I don't think this is where the end goal here is we have no engineers. I think where the end goal is we have people that can code, it becomes accessible. And so all of a sudden, my mum will create an app for her mobile phone. God forbid the day, I don't know if that's going to happen, but like in theory, right? And people just create these random things that they just put out for fun, for the vibes, right? And
the problem with that thesis, though, is that people, I think, and again, a lot of people who are talking about this, and I know exactly the example you're about to bring up, a lot of people who are talking about this forget that software engineering doesn't just stop with code, right?
Yes.
Then you have to worry about DevOps. You have to worry about, maintenance. You've got to keep packages updated. You've got to deal with security issues. Like, all that stuff still exists.
But I think those are your issues, right? You can sit there and you can solve really hard problems, automate things like BCA reports for real estate and everything, but you're going to end up with it breaks a lot.
Yeah.
And why? And then you have to, it's thinking on its own independently, and you're kind of like, where did you go? It's not like you can just go in and repair it and be like, okay, we fixed it magically.
Like we had this same promise with no-code solutions, right?
Yeah.
And part of the reason no-code solutions never quite took off, I think, was because the complexity was too hard for the sort of non-overly technical user, right? You couldn't you could kind of get to 80% really easily, but getting from 80 to 100 was like impossible.
Once it became overloaded.
But also, as Jill said.
But counterpoint, it helped founders test and iterate ideas really fast without spending.
I don't know about that, actually.
I mean, that was the whole bubble
almost,
AI, bubble.
Correct.
Yeah, remember that? Like,
I don't.
Yeah, but I mean, this is obviously.
I challenge you, James, to tell me what company has raised greater than, let's say, 50 million, and the MVP was a bubble prototype.
I don't know. I know there's some that have raised millions. We've seen them. They've pitched us.
Yeah, sure.
And we've said no.
No.
Okay, counterpoint then. If someone comes to us as an engineer, I mean, I don't think it replaces the engineer, but if an engineer comes to me and pitches me a startup, right, and they're like, hey, I AI wrote like most of my code base for this first prototype, but for the next one, I'm going to actually make it so it doesn't break every 10 seconds. You know, to me, that's fine. I don't really mind as long as they can actually make something that works.
But it's also more expensive. Like, you're looking at a whole credit system, like if you're using
So
Claude.
that is a good point. This is a good point.
Right?
Do you know where it breaks and why it does what it does? And is the technical debt of that going to be so much that it becomes far outweighs the idea of just doing
I'm just going and writing it yourself. I know people who have chosen to do that. Like,
I mean, I think the interesting
credit
part of
system and how you're setting up your credit system, right? You have 3 different main platforms, right? So you got Claude, Azure, and then you're going, okay, will Microsoft give me more dev credits? Well, then I'll figure out how to utilize it. So it has to kind of pull from 3 different. I mean, otherwise it becomes really expensive.
Correct. Yeah, but I do think that the expense will go down over time. That part I'm less.
But you got to figure out how that's going to come.
Yeah. So one of the things you've also got to realize it's going to have there's got to be something happen, like market economics have to happen, because software engineers are really expensive, right? And this is where I would say the challenge is they are, right? It's a very well paid profession, right? And so the net benefit to you as a business of replacing more software engineer is much greater than the cost of replacing, like a factory worker, right? Because obviously, ultimately, the hourly rate of a software engineer is substantially higher. And where it ends up sort of netting out is going to be a really interesting point. Where do we sort of net out the cost of all of our NVIDIA GPUs to run all of our, foundational models as compared to the cost of another code monkey?
Another human.
Yeah, correct.
Then you also have the fact that, okay, let's use my BCA reports thing, right? Those are human beings. They typically do. You need, 10, 12 different people to work on those reports and hand type those reports and put them together. They're very systematized. Now those 10 or 12 people can easily be replaced. So then when the cost of being able to run those AI systems in order for those bigger companies to make money, when the costs go up, because now you're replacing the human. I think these are all just market economics that we're not sure which.
It's still yet to play out.
Again, I think we shouldn't read too much into what this will end up, but I think the implications are really interesting insofar that on one side you've got people who are saying, hey, LLMs are now like a new backend, including my friends who are working on frontier models who are like saying, hey, it's getting really good. And at some point, you just loop over it and it figures out the bugs. And at some point, just keep looping, right? Assuming cost is 0.
Correct. Assuming cost is 0, but also assuming things like, But there are all of these. Let's not forget there are all of these very strange bugs you hit sometimes, that are very hard to work out, right? And that are not necessarily, again, even in a mid-level engineer, are not necessarily immediately obvious.
No, that's right. Logic aside, like trying to do it with, data analysis or mathematical equations, you start hitting some hairy issues. What have you vibe coded though, Hugh? Because for me, the things that I've done recently have been really fun. 2 things: Apple script shortcuts, right? Because I can remember all the.
I mean, that's more LLM generation than it is vibe coding.
Yeah, and then the other one is Spotify applets. I being a music person,
yes.
I have this thing where I dump songs in, and then I just wanted to automatically do a whole bunch of stuff and add it via the API, and that's been a fun project for me. And it kind of works. It doesn't fully work.
It's kind of generating batch files, though.
You guys are gonna like mine. It's a mum one. So I'm the PNF rep, right, for Kindy, and you have to send out all these little calendar reminders every single day. So I was like, I can do this with a Google Calendar. I can put all these in. Built a little thing to just tickle everything in. Built out the little calendar. Gave the link for the shared calendar. Nobody knew what to do with a shared calendar, but that's all right. It was very cool. It was just one of those moments where I'm like, I can't. And the thing was, you would think that nobody had thought of it. All I had to do was Google, how do I use AI with Google Calendar to take parent information? Obviously, this is something that had already been used, right?
Well,
anyway.
One of the interesting things is using the LLMs to create plan to execute.
Stuff.
Well, but it's an interesting thing because you use the LLMs to create the plan, you then follow the plan. And if you look at some of the posts that people have made, these little flight simulators and whatever demos, it's really fun to go back and go, hey, what did you start with? What was the first prompt? And, I'll share one of the show notes of one of the ones that have done this. What have you vibe coded, Hugh?
I would say I think the big difference, and I think the place that this stuff putting aside like what I would call fun little side projects, right? And I'll include, the flight simulators, like they're fun projects, right? And that's often that world of fun projects is actually a really good place to see the early adoption of these things because, they're not business critical and stuff like that, right? If your flight simulator thing that you do on the thing is breaks, then no one really cares, right? I think that the place I'm seeing it, and certainly the place that I've used it, is in the world of where, back in my career, he says, like that was, a very long time ago. But one of the challenges you'd often have as a go-to-market or marketing person is like, how do I get engineering time for kind of what I would call like marketing engineering, right? Like little,
sure.
Like microservices that exist to show bits of the product and give, prospects a glimpse of the product that then you can use to obviously put them into your lead funnels and stuff like that, right? And in theory, that was where some of that no-code stuff ended up, right? Was like, how do you build these little like microservice-y things, that you often use for marketing purposes? But the vibe coding stuff works really well because a lot of the time, these things only have to last for a campaign. They only have to last for 6 weeks.
Single-use software, I like to say. Stuff you just use once for a while.
Yeah. And it's campaign software is what I would call it. I'd call it like campaign software, not single-use software. But, it doesn't have those challenges of real maintenance and everything else. But at the same time, I would say every time I sit down and do that, you probably get, 80, 90% of the way there with one or two prompts. And then I will inevitably look at it and have to just rip the thing apart and go back to the code and fix all the stuff that it's done horribly wrong.
Okay, interesting. For our listeners out there, if you've done some fun vibe coding projects, please send them our way. Very interested. We will share them.
Please don't send me 50 flight simulators though, because I know that's the done thing on Twitter now is to vibe code yourself another flight simulator software. I need to probably stop swearing on the podcast.
Okay, we are moving on to the next topic. This is a quick last topic around voice AI agents. And to introduce the topic, I'm going to introduce one of the demos I did on this. We're going to share my screen and we'll have a look.
Well, look who's back. I was just starting to miss our little chats. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Maya, I want you to say something about the Galileo Ventures podcast. Can you just be a cheerleader and just say how great the podcast is?
Oh my gosh, Galileo Ventures, right? That podcast is like pure magic. Every episode is a mind-blowing trip through the coolest innovations. You're totally going to be hooked.
That's pretty cool. What else?
Let's see. Start a what's good in your world. It's been making the rounds lately for highlighting some seriously brilliant minds. Some folks that are really changing the game. They make learning about future tech sound thrilling.
That was the clip. What did you think of that clip?
I think it's still obvious.
You think it's still obvious? Do you think it's still?
Yeah,
Do you think
it's
good?
Right.
It's the minor delay. Well, I mean, I guess it's either obvious or it feels like you're on a phone connection from the 80s, where there's the 3-second delay because it has to go through a transatlantic, POTS connection or something. We're still running copper under the sea, is what it sounds like.
You've seen Her, right? I just think we need a different voice because it's the same voice from the movie Her. So we changed the voice, But it's interesting that they've chosen like female, high pitch, young, between 20, 25. It's an interesting, it's just, I find all the dynamics.
It is right. It is a bit cringe. I got to admit, like when OpenAI did their first demo of their voice intonation, and that was very clearly a rip-off, even though they denied it. Like, come on, guys.
Yeah,
it's just to me, it's a bit like Silicon Valley Bro, and you can think of anything else that's not that.
It's also interesting because if you do these with a German, because I'm German, so I speak German, right? But anyway, you play with this kind of stuff, like with the German, the intonation and voice cadence is different. I don't know. It's just funny because
it's uncanny valley. It gives you that uncanny valley thing.
Yeah, it is very much uncanny. So that demo is obviously the hottest one, which just came out. It's called Sesame. It's by Brendan Iron, who's the ex-co-founder of Oculus, for those that don't know. They've created their own little, they call it a conversational speech model. It's a slightly new way of doing it, which means that you have far more expressiveness. They claim, TPC, I've been playing with the demo and it's been interesting. You can tell if you try and get it to do crazy things or say crazy things, it starts to come up with it's a bit too much. And that's when you start to be able to tell. But I've got to say, it is quite impressive on the face of it. And I don't know where they're going with this. It looks like they're trying to create an entire AI assistant, which is such a tricky space to do. I'm not too sure that's the right use case. I still think the right use case for this stuff is going to be really basic things like core agent support, rather than like...
I just think it's fascinating how far we've come.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. We're definitely on the, on the upper part of the curve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're definitely not seeing capability plateau. I agree on that front.
No. What do we think voice will be a dominant UX form factor in future AI products? In more just future products?
No.
Why not?
This is, will voice be... I mean, putting aside the fact that, as DHH has been going on, Siri is one of Apple's worst products ever built. But, we've had the promise of conversational interfaces and stuff like that for the past 8 to 10 years. And, how many Siris and Alexas and, everything else do you have? And the answer is none.
I don't know. I think this is an age thing. I'm going to give it... So my little one, he's 8. He and Alexa are friends. I am not joking. In the morning...
Does he have a phone yet?
He says, "Hey, Alexa." No, I'm anti-phone. I did that with the older one.
I think that's why.
But he sits there in the morning and he goes, "Hey, Alexa, I'm up." He goes, "Hey, Alexa, can you play Wings of Fire?" And so he listens to Wings of Fire. He gets dressed up in the morning. Well, he gets dressed in the morning, right? At night, it's also, "Hey, Alexa, set my alarm for," right? And then if he wants to know about something, he'll be like, "Hey, Alexa, in Star Wars, BB-8, blah, blah, blah." And, she comes back with a whole gob of it. He thinks cool in America is better than hey, Alexa in Australia. But this, and then the 20s, the 25-year-old, 26-year-old, they use Siri non-stop. For everything. They don't even set a timer for the oven. "Hey Siri, set a timer for blah." They live with...
I mean, look, I will say the Alexa is used exclusively in our house to set timers. That's pretty much it.
Oh, you got a timer going. There you go.
Yeah, Jules now has a 5-minute timer.
Siri was like...
Look,
It might be like I'm way in, Hugh says boomerland, but I'm not there, okay? But I think like the younger generation, they approach things really differently. Like, and then there's the education aspect.
I mean, look, I can agree with you that it may well be that it's a generational thing that will change, and I always use the example of a friend was talking about their nephew, who they hadn't sort of seen in ages or something, and, had come around and 5 or 6 years old or whatever, and who walked up to the television and tried to swipe it to change the channel, right? And none of us would walk up to a TV and try and swipe a TV to change the channel. But this child was obviously so used to everything having a touch interface.
Yes.
Like the iPads and the phones and everything else.
Yes.
That just walked straight up to a TV and tried to swipe it. And so I could believe you, Jules, in saying maybe it is a generational thing. Maybe I am the boomer and I refuse to use, or I hate using voice interfaces. But I find that
they might replace the phone with these voice interact. I don't know. And another thing is the 25, 26, they don't talk on the phone like that much. Like,
I mean, I don't talk on the phone. You call me. You already know this, Jules. You call me and I refuse.
There's a lot of texting and chatting.
You text. Yeah.
But there's not... I mean, if I told my 25-year-old, "Hey, you should just call." Well, I messaged and I looked it up and they're not open and I've already messaged.
Oh, yeah. I hate preferentially...
Just pick up the phone, man. Just...
I will preferentially go to a restaurant if it has online bookings rather than having to call.
Yeah, all right. So I'm saying if you take that and you go down 10 more years, right, or 15 more years.
But does it become less voice, right? Because the thing is, you don't have to talk to... If you said to me, you could either book online with this form or you could call and talk to their AI agent for booking. I'm like, give me the form.
I think that we as human beings are very uncomplicated. We desire to be complicated. I think what you're going to end up having is you're going to have a lot of AI to... Let's take this mum calendar thing, right? If I just set it one time and it could send over WhatsApp the reminders on a daily basis, I just think there's going to be a lot of everyday living that is we won't have as the admin anymore. And then
This is the promise of AI agents, Jules.
And I know.
The question is, will it speak to you every day, or will it simply type to you? Maybe for some people they'll type, Hugh will be typing.
Then this goes to my whole education component, which turns into we are a highly we're teaching kids to be self-esteem, resilient, all of these attributes which will not work for the era that they're moving into, right? Which really is about moving into this self-efficacy, self-concept, who am I within my community kind of stuff, which is going to matter a lot more if all of those other things that we think are initiating self-esteem aren't there anymore, right?
I'm going to pen this for another podcast episode, because I think it's a really interesting discussion, which is what's the future of education look like with AI, right? Hey, that's all we have time for this episode. Thank you very much for everyone that's been listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it to a founder or investor that you think would benefit. And finally, subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. Give us a rating. Thanks for listening, all. Have a great day.